Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special meeting of the Penridge School Board. I'd like to start by pledging to the flag. If you would please join me. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mrs. Cron, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Casper?
Here.
Mr. Deming? Here. Mrs. Miller? Here. Mr. Agomo?
Here.
Mr. Sarnes?
Here.
Mrs. Schmidt? Here. Mr. Thompson? Dr. Yarnell?
Here. At this point, we will have comments and questions from guests. Do we have any on the list? Mrs. Cron, do you know?
No.
A blank list. Is there anyone who would like to comment before we start the meeting? If not, we will move on to the motions and business of the meeting. The first is to approve the bills list dated January 8th, 2014. Do I have a motion to approve that bills list? And a second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Deming and seconded by Mr. Ragomo to approve the bills list from January 8th. Comments or questions from board members? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. And I will apologize. Mr. Thompson is out of town, and he's at a point where the cell phone costs are prohibitive, so he will not be joining us tonight on the phone as was originally intended. At this point, we are going to move in an effort to replace Mr. Cranford for the unexpired term from January 8th of this year, today, until December 7th, 2015. I would note that we will open the floor to board nominations. We had 4 candidates who spoke on Monday night. Presumably we would be choosing from among those 4 candidates. Obviously the nomination will require a second, and once we have all the nominations placed on the table, I will ask for votes from board members individually as to which of the candidates you would support for this position. Are there any questions or comments before I ask for the said nominations? Mr. Casper.
Could you say that one more time? We're going to nominate each individual?
Well, as many individuals as board members choose to, and it requires a second. And once we have that, then we'll vote among whatever candidate or candidates that are on the floor. And, oh, I should mention that it does require 5 votes to elect or appoint. The public elects, we appoint this board member. So if we don't get 5 votes in the initial balloting, we can do this again, hold everyone hostage until they decide on one of the candidates. So at this point, I'll open the floor to nominations for the replacement of Mr. Cranford. Mr. Casper.
I nominate Mrs. Yardley, Christine Yardley.
Do we have a second for that nomination? Thank you. So we have a nomination for Mr. Casper and a second from Mrs. Schmidt or Mrs. Yardley. Are there other nominations? Yes, Mrs.
I'd like to nominate Mrs. Banis Clemens, yes.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. We have a nomination from Mrs. Miller and a second from Mr. Deming for Mrs. Banis Clemens. Are there any other nominations? If not, then I will poll the board as to votes for the 2 candidates, either Mrs. Yardley or Mrs. Banis Clemens, because they're the only 2 who have been nominated. So actually, Mrs. Cron, will you call the board members and see which of those 2 candidates they cast their vote for?
Mr. Casper?
Christine Yardley.
Mr. Deming?
Miss Baris Clemens.
Mrs. Miller?
Mrs. Banis Clemens.
Mr. Agomo?
Mrs. Yardley.
Mr. Sarnes?
Mrs. Yardley.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Mrs. Yardley.
Dr. Yarnell?
Mrs. Christine Yardley. So, if I count correctly, we have 5 votes in favor of Mrs. Yardley. That means that she is the new board member. Mrs. Yardley, you are here. You now have come to the worst part of this. The state of Pennsylvania not only allows a judge or a notary public to swear in a new board member, but the president, temporary president or of the board as well. I'm going to do this. I'm not very practiced in this, and I will read it to you if you will come forward. Actually, I'll come to you. I'm going to read from the script simply because this is not something I memorized. And if you will, repeat after me. If you'd raise your right hand, please.
Okay.
I, and state your name.
I, Christine Yardley,
Having been elected or appointed to the office of school director of the school district of Penridge,
having been appointed as
to the office of
to the office of school director
Penridge,
of Penridge,
County of Bucks,
County of Bucks,
and State of Pennsylvania,
State of Pennsylvania,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support, obey, and defend
that I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of this Commonwealth,
and the Constitution of this Commonwealth,
and I will discharge my duties with fidelity.
and I will discharge my duties with fidelity.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You're now welcome to join us.
Okay, thank you.
They probably have the name card ready, didn't they?
All right, with that said, we will now move to announcements. The next school board meeting is scheduled for January 27th, 2014. That's the last Monday of this month, and it will be held here in the district administration office. There will be an executive session that will follow tonight's meeting for the purpose of personnel issues. And Mrs. Yardley, I hope you will stay and join us in that endeavor. At this point, comments or questions from guests? If not, questions from the press? Everyone's silent tonight. All right, thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned. If you will, we will reconvene for this executive session in about 5 minutes. Thank you.